Hello, hi, good morning, everyone. I hope you all are having a wonderful Saturday. I appreciate you taking the time to join me today. We will be getting started here shortly. Just give another minute or so for everyone to come on and join in. But just want to real quick introduce myself. My name is Kelvin Patrick. I am an enrollment counselor here at Purdue University, and you are hopefully in the right place. This is going to be our Masters of Science in Aeronautics and Astronautics webinar here at Purdue University. So, if that sounds right to you, then yes, you are, of course, in the right place today. So, I'm just looking at seeing some people come into chats. I'm seeing some familiar names. I know I did speak with some of you about this, and you did share with me that you are going to be joining today just to get a little bit more information about the program. So I am definitely looking forward to it. It should be a lot of fun. I enjoy having these conversations with you all. And again, it is going to be a lot of information that you'll be given today. But don't worry, if it seems like it's going to be kind of information overload, you will be able to get this recording after the fact, so no worries there. Okay, so seems like people start trickling in here. We'll go ahead and begin. Obviously, as I just mentioned, I introduced myself here. Again, this is one of the programs that I work with in the engineering department. Also, if I'm being a little bit biased, one of my favorite programs because who doesn't like talking about space, right? So our agenda for today, we're going to be looking at, of course, the overview of this program and, the focus area, and of course, the space systems engineering major that is in the aeronautics program as well. Look at some things that I know some of you have some questions about, like transfer credits, tuition, assistance costs, application requirements, the degree options and objectives, and of course, the all important next steps. So we'll be going over all of those things throughout this presentation today. Something else that I'd like to point out, just as a friendly housekeeping reminder, I do have the Q&A open, so if you do have any questions throughout this presentation, please do not hesitate. Feel free. Make sure that you put those questions in there. I will be looking at that throughout, and if it's warranted, I will just stop right then and there and answer it. If not, chances are I will be getting an answer throughout the presentation as well. But we will also have time at the very end for questions as well. So again, I know sometimes as you're going through, like, I don't want to forget my question. It's fine. Please just drop it in the Q&A. Like I said, I do have it open. I will be looking at it, and depending on what that question is, I may answer it right then and there, or I will just wait to the end, just depending on, again, like I said, what that question happens to be. All right. So, what is aeronautics and astronautics here at Purdue University? Oddly enough, I get asked that question quite a bit. I have people who are coming into this program and they're not really quite sure what it is. It's like, okay, I would imagine it has something to deal with space, maybe rockets, that type of thing. But I even here it's like, okay, is there a difference between aeronautics and then astronautics type of thing? And the answer to those questions is yes, yes, there is. So the aeronautics, for those of you who may not know, are going to deal with, and again, this is just very surface level, very basic. There's a lot more that goes into it than this, but just at a very surface level, it's going to deal with vehicles that happen to fly within Earth's atmosphere, such as airplanes, helicopters, that sort of thing, right? The astronautics part of it is going to focus with vehicles that are designed for space flight. Okay, so beyond Earth's atmosphere. That's kind of just a very simplistic way of looking for it. So depending on what your main area of study is going to be within the Aero Astro program, whether you want to be a little bit closer to home, so dealing with things within the Earth's atmosphere, or a little bit beyond Earth's atmosphere, will kind of be determining what you're going to be doing within this field. Okay. Nice thing about it as well, regardless of what you're studying, your degree is going to look like this. You would earn a degree from Purdue University in Master's of Science in Aeronautics and Astronautics. Something that I also get asked a lot of, and you'll notice that it's not there as well. You're like, okay, I know this is an online program. I'm a little hesitant about that because, sometimes online might has a dirty connotation like, oh my gosh, it's lesser than a real program. Or I'm not certain I want to do that because I don't want my degree to have online on it. So just keep in mind, obviously, it's not going to say anything about online on there. Some of you probably remember doing our conversation, but if this is the first time that you're hearing this, I just want to be very clear that remember, first and foremost, you are going to be a student of Purdue University. Your modality just happens to be that of an online. All right. Remember, there's three types of modality students we have at Purdue University. That's in person, hybrid, and online. All right. The Aero Astro program actually has all three modalities, which means that you are going to, depending on the class that you take, will be paired with other students in other modalities as well. It's going to be the same instructors for those courses. So again, that's just something to keep in mind. You also will have the same benefits as any other student because again, you are a student of the Purdue University. So you'll have an ID card. Those are all like virtual on your phone now anyway, as well. They stopped doing physical ID cards a while ago at this point. But yes, so that's something to keep in mind there. So that's what the Aero Astro Engineering program is, kind of the nuts and bolts. Now, when we look at why you should choose the Aero Astro program here at Purdue University, this gets I think, a little bit more interesting. Yeah, as some of you probably do realize, we have been given the nickname of, you know, the cradle of astronauts here at Purdue University. And that's for good reason, mainly because we have graduated more astronauts than any other institution by far. We actually just had two more astronauts that have joined the ranks. That brings the total up to 30, if I'm not mistaken, this past year. So again, with something that we are very proud of, and actually have a something I'm going to share a little bit later on in this presentation that talks a little bit about that. So we are obviously pioneers in aerospace engineering. Long history of excellence. Notable alumni is obviously starting with Neil Armstrong, Gus Grissom, showcasing our deep roots in space exploration. We have renowned faculty. You're going to learn from world-class professors who are not only leaders in academia, but they also are engaged in the aerospace industry to this day. I mean, whether that's research or innovation, they're still within the know, which is really nice. I'd like to refer to it as you're still going to be getting it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, right? We are leaders here at Purdue in collaboration with major aerospace companies and organizations like, of course, NASA. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, just to name the few, both public, private companies and entities, government ones as well. I mean, have a lot of partnerships with Space Force, Air Force as well. That really just brings an unparalleled networking and career opportunities. So again, global aerospace hub. You would also have flexible and specialized curriculum. Again, whether you're interested in things like propulsion, space applications, aerodynamics, autonomy and control, or the like, you're going to find all that and more within the curriculum here at Purdue, as we have a broad spectrum of specializations that give you the opportunity to tailor your education to fit your unique career goals that you have for yourself. So again, those are some of the things that you get to decide and choose and pick for yourself. Not only that, this modality is really nice as well, the online modality, because it is designed for the working professional in mind, in that all of the courses are going to be asynchronous. So you don't have to worry about, for example, if a class meets Wednesdays and Fridays at 10 a.m., waking up at 10 a.m., uh, you know, Indiana, West Lafayette time, if you live in, for example, California. Okay, that's going to be kind of early. Or if you live in Europe, as an international student, definitely a big time change. So again, asynchronous courses, taking it at your own schedule, kind of fitting it in there is going to be great. We recommend that you take 1 to 2 courses as uh, uh, doing as an online student, because you are working full time. So you're not going to be burning yourself out on both ends of the spectrum there. And because of this, it would take a little bit longer to get through the degree. On average, about 2 to 3 years to do the 30 credits and 10 courses. But again, still very, very manageable. Okay, let's see. Most of the in person also available. Oh, I actually that was when I answered yes. So same courses again, online, in person. There is, when you look on our website, we have and I've sent most of that to you, but if you just look at our engineering courses list, you'll see that online. That'd be the list of all the courses that are available online. There maybe be a small handful, like 3 or 4 something courses that are in person only, but again, vast majority of them are, of course, going to be available online as well. Okay, so done. One question related to that topic. Let's see. I mean, spring term if possible. Okay, so good question. Yes. Now, this is where the idea of choice comes in. So the question there is, um, if someone's interested in offer every a course is offered every 2 years in the spring. Is it possible to offer these courses every year in every term instead? It would be very difficult to take these courses that are only offered every 2 years. So, again, this is where if you looked at the courses for the Air Astro program, or even the space systems engineering major itself, you'll see that there's a lot of different choices and options that you have available. That is because, again, as mentioned, not all courses are going to be offered every semester. Some, unfortunately, are offered every other year. Some are only offered in the spring. Some are only offered in the fall. So, again, this allows you that flexibility to pick and choose. So, I counsel that you need to make sure that you are being flexible and being with having an option, not just to, this is my main option. I just want to go with plan A, but you have to have a plan B, a plan C, plan D, possibly even a plan E, just to make sure that if you can't get with plan A, it's like you understand that's okay. Well, let's see if plan B will work out. And if not, that's okay, maybe plan C. Because again, some classes are going to be like that, where they're not going to meet every semester. They'll meet every other year. Some, again, only meet on even years. So again, that's just the way that they are set up, unfortunately. But again, that's why we have a nice long list of different classes you can pick and choose from to help build out that schedule. Okay. All right. All right. Let's see. Um, oh, since we're talking about that, I know I said it's typical. Yeah, graduate. You'll be done with this about 2 to 3 years. Someone was wondering if is it possible to graduate in 1 year in this program? Is it possible? Yes, it is. It's possible. Realistically, no. Like, is it possible? Yes, you technically could do it, but realistically, no. At best, honestly, truthfully, it will probably be more like 18 months. And that's if everything, and I mean everything, went perfectly well. Just based off of what I was just saying about how the classes work out, you would have to be very flexible in your plan. You can't be very rigid and say, these are the classes that I want to take. I don't want to take anything else. Because if the classes don't meet, then that's pretty much it. Also, keep in mind that, if something happens and you have to drop a class or the grades don't work out, then that will throw off that timetable as well. But realistically, it's probably going to be 2 to 3 years. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Oh, let's you choose one. Can you translate paper on site? You can transition if you start off with online. You can switch back to you. It is possible to switch to in person, but that would be something you would need to speak with your academic advisor about after you've already been admitted. So it is possible, but again, that's something you would talk to your academic advisor once you're in the program. So there's again something that you need to do and speak with. You shouldn't have to fill out and like start over from scratch and do a completely different application. Like I said, it's the same program and things of that nature, but and it's the same cost for the program. So nothing like that changes, but you would just need to speak with your academic advisor about that as well. But yes, that shouldn't be an issue. Dun, 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 dun. Full-time finish program. Um, 2 to 3 years is the average, but if it takes longer than that, like 4 years, 5 years, that should be fine. I mean, honestly, 5 years was, I would say, should be probably the max, mainly because, again, it's only 10 classes. So if you do 2 classes a year, yeah, 5 years should be more than enough time, so if you look at it that way. Okay. So, degree requirements. We're going to go ahead and hmm. Sorry, but I'll take a look at that. Let's see. Huh, it's weird. Should be. Hmm. Okay. My apologies on that. Here, let me just do this. Because all of this, I'm dropping it in here. Just drop that in the chat. All of that information is just going to be here on the Aero Astro page. That's where the QR code took you. It just took you to the main engineering page for the program. I'll look at that. I don't know why that's not working, but thank you for letting me know. Appreciate that. Okay, so the degree requirements. Pretty simple, straightforward for the Aero Astro program. You're going to have four courses that you need to take from one of your six available topic areas. So you have aerodynamics, aerospace systems, um, astrodynamics and space applications, autonomy and control, structures and materials, and propulsions. So those are going to be your six topic areas. So right here. Okay. So these are six topic areas. You would pick one of those six as your main focus area. Okay. So you'll pick one of those six and take four courses out of that. That's going to give you 12 credits. Then you would take a secondary focus area. So again, let's say if you chose propulsion as your main one, you take four courses from propulsion, and then let's say you took aerospace systems as your secondary. Then so you're taking two courses from aerospace systems. So that's going to be a total of six courses that you've taken, right? So six courses, that's going to be 18 credits. Then you're going to need to take two courses for math. So there's a math requirement there. And then two technical elective courses. Basically, that's going to be pretty much anything within the realm of engineering. Most of our students, basically, they go back to the focus areas. They either take something from their primary or secondary focus areas and just take two additional courses from one of them. Or if they're like, yeah, I really also like autonomy and control, they may take two courses from there as well. So it's really up to you how you would like to do that. You don't necessarily have to take two from the same one. Maybe use like aerodynamics, you want to take one from aerodynamics and then one from autonomy and control. You can do that as well. So it's really completely up to you how you would like to structure that. But as you can see, that would add up to 10 courses or 30 credits. Each class is going to be 3 credits. Okay. All right. Let's see. Any questions? Something's in the Q&A. Ah, so good question. I had someone ask, is it possible for to do a thesis-based option? So that is one of the key differences with the online modality option. There is no thesis option available. So thesis option is only available for in person, just based on all the things that go into doing that, doing a thesis. Again, working with the professor and all of those things, it's just honestly, truthfully easier if you're in person. So that option is not available online. Okay, good question. All right, so that is going to be everything for the Aero Astro program. Now, we do have a major within the Aero Astro program, the Space Systems Engineering major. Now, this program is designed to produce students with a firm grounding in space systems engineering and be well prepared to lead and execute those processes that will result in space systems that are, responsible for whatever company they're working with those specific needs. This program, will educate our students to develop new products, services, and as well as organizations to address challenges that are facing those societies, what societies is facing in space. So this program came about with a lot of discussions from our industry partnerships with such as NASA and Space Force and the like, because they saw where the industry was heading and really had expressed great interest in clearing defining this program for design, analysis, improvement, and control for complex space systems that they were seeing was coming abundantly clear that we need to continue to move forward with space exploration. So this program is really going to be on the forefront of helping to achieve those goals and face those new challenges. It's pretty straightforward. 30 credits, obviously. You're going to have your core requirement, 6 credits, 2 courses that are going to be within the space systems program. You'll have your math requirement, and then your technical elective courses, similar to the Aero program. And then you're going to have 12 credits from your space systems electives as well. Okay. So again, pretty straightforward, very interesting program. I know we have a lot of people who are going through this from all walks of life. I've gone to a number of conferences. I know a number of military personnel actually have been interested in this program, particularly in the Space Force, obviously. Seems to be right up their alley. So, admission criteria. Now, this is one that I hear a lot for. So, I'm going to take a little time to go through this because this one can be a bit confusing, especially when it comes to the GRE requirement. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about that one as well. Now, first and foremost, the math background. Now, some of you who probably have looked on the website have noticed that I was like, okay, there's a lot of math classes there. Now, you do not need to have all of these math classes. You need to take some combination of these math classes. However, with that being said, it is highly recommended that you have Calculus 3 as one of them. And as I'm sure you are aware, if you if it's recommended that you have Calculus 3 as one of them, and in order to have Calculus 3, you would have had to have taken Calc 1 and 2. So you need to have Calc 1, 2, and 3. And and then any of the others, one or two of the others, right? So I typically like to say about 4 or 5 of these math classes. I've seen people usually maybe you'll have like a linear algebra and a physics or a statistics and a differential equation as that kind of rounds it out. That's fine. It's completely up to you. But again, just keep in mind you do not need to have all of these math classes. If you do, that's fine. You're basically done. Now, the undergrad background. This is very important. It needs to be preferably engineering, and within engineering, aerospace or mechanical engineering are highly preferred. However, any engineering discipline is okay. If it's not engineering discipline, we do accept STEM backgrounds. However, preferred STEM backgrounds that we're looking for are going to be math or physics. That's real important. So just again, keep that in mind. If you do have questions, obviously, reach out to me. I'll have my contact information at the end here. But mo I know I've spoken with most of you about some of this already. So pretty straightforward. Now, the GRE, this is very important. If you are a graduate from Purdue University in the Aero Astro program, then you don't have to worry about the GRE at all. Congratulations, you're good. If you have less than 3 years of work experience, and that is 2 years, 11 months, 29 days, you need to take the GRE. Okay? If you have 3 years or more of work experience, and what we mean by work experience, that is going to be full-time work, not internship, not part-time, not work study, full-time work experience at a company in that field. For example, working as an aerospace engineer at NASA, for example, or at Boeing. Okay, that is what we're talking about as practical work experience. All right, needs to be at least 3 years. Now, it does not necessarily need to be 3 years consecutive, but it shouldn't be, for example, like 1 year, then you have like 2, 3 years off, and then you work another year, and then maybe you have 5 years off, and then you work another year, right? It could be like, oh, I did a year and a half, then maybe I had maybe 6 months off, and then I did 2 more years, right? Something like that is fine. But when we're talking about long periods, gaps, probably not, no. Um, if you feel that you have that actual work experience that I'm talking about that would warrant a waiver, okay, on our website that I shared with you, in that admissions section, you'll see where it talks about waivers. You would click on that link and you'll see a little bit more information. You would need to reach out to a person called John Morzinski after you've submitted your application and email him. You will email him basically in summary, hey, John, just want to let you know I applied to the Aero Astro program or the Space Systems Engineering major, and I believe I qualify for a GRE waiver, um, blah, 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 yada, yada. Uh, just share with him your work experience. He's going to take a look at your application and he will determine if you qualify for a waiver. If you qualify for a waiver, it will be marked on your application. If you do not qualify for a waiver, you will need to take the GRE. There is no getting around that. If he says no, you have to take it. Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm clear. There's no appealing. There's none. If he says no, it's not waived. All right. Also, time frame for that. You want to make sure that you do that as soon as possible. If you feel that you have a waiver, immediately, like start your application, submit it, reach out to him immediately once you submit your application. Don't wait till you get close to the deadline because if he decides no, it's not going to be waived, you have to take the GRE. And if it's not taken by the time the deadline arrives, then you won't be able to apply for that semester and you'll have to wait. Okay. So again, just keep all of that in mind. Let's see, we have a couple of questions there. Can we get an application fee waiver too? No, no application fee waiver for this webinar. No, unfortunately, no. Let's see. Does your job title need to be specific to aerospace industry, or would mechanical engineering at a apply? Um, I just use that as an example. Mechanical engineering at an aerospace company would be okay as well. It honestly just depends. It's not necessarily the title, it's more of what work you're doing at that company. Okay. So that's why when you email them, you need to make sure you're being very specific about where you're working, what you're doing, and as well as how long you've been there. So again, you share all that information. He's going to look at your application because you have to put all that stuff in your application anyway. And then we'll double check all that stuff and we'll let you know if you qualify for a waiver. Okay. Let's see. Is it possible for PhD to do a PhD after completing a master's? Hmm. As far as doing a PhD after completing your online master's, I would say I am not 100% positive about this. I don't think that would be an issue, that you shouldn't be able to do that. We do have, I know we have our the Eng program as well. It's our online Doctor of Engineering program. Our our PhD programs right now are all in person. So we don't have those here at Purdue online, the PhD programs, but we do have Doctor of Engineering, which is an online program. But again, I only work with the master's program, so I can't speak fully to that. But if I'm not mistaken, that you should be able to. Okay. Let's see. With 2 years work assistant passing the FXA count? No. You have to, again, 3 years. It has to be 3 years. If not, you need to take the GRE. Okay. But yes. Good question though. If you have proven masters done in adjacent field, is that looked upon favorably? I guess if you could elaborate more favorably as far as what, I mean, it's not a bad thing if you have an extra master's, but if you are asking something a bit more specific, please just let me know. But I mean, no, it's not a bad thing if you have it. They're not going to look at it as a bad thing. But if you want to know something a bit more specific as far as that question, just please let me know. Okay. Does the 3-year GRE waiver apply to the application's due date, i.e. July 1st? Yes, yes, it does. So that's why I'm saying if it's like by that time, even if it's, you know, 2 years, 11 months, like, 29 days, if it's, you have to take the GRE. So just make sure that that's taken care of. I want to, okay, all right. So yeah. Again, I'm not fully versed in like the PhD program, so I would just reach out to them and double check, just get some information about that, to the PhD department and just ask. I mean, again, I don't see that being a problem, but just double check. The What would be sufficient or competitive scores? That information is in the link that I sent you. Let's see. I don't know off the top of my head. Let's see. Expected GRE scores for all student. Verbal is 156, quantitative is 159, analytical is 4.0. So those would be the scores, the expected scores that we are looking for. Okay. I've been working for 1.5 decades. Hmm. No, I mean, you've been working as a mechanical engineer. That's fine. That's again one of the I mean, obviously accepted backgrounds. We have, truth be told, honestly, lots of different backgrounds apply for this program, but two of the most popular by far are air astro, obviously, and then mechanical engineers. Those are like the top two that come into this program, followed by systems engineers. Kind of obviously, I would say a lot of industrial engineers as well. So, yes. Mhm. Yes, John, that information, it's also on the link that I shared in the webinar chat, but I will drop that in the chat again as well. Just keep in mind, remember, only reach out once you have submitted your application. So that is his email. And whoops, I meant to actually put his name first. Okay, right. Acceptance rates, not really. But I will say we don't have like a quota for the program. So, for example, it's not like, okay, we are only taking 15 students this semester, for example. Um, so if we had, let's say we get, I don't know, like 37 applications for the summer. Just as an example, we don't take applicants for the summer, which is why I'm just using the summer. So let's say we had 37 applications for the summer, and we looked at them, and they were all wonderful students. They met the requirements, checked all the boxes, everything that we're looking for. We would accept all 37 of them because, again, we take a holistic approach to the applications. Okay. So again, just keeping that in mind. It's not necessarily that we have a quota or like we need to like, hey, we reached this number, that's it. There are things we are looking for, of course, but at the same time, it's not like, hey, we're starting here with this number in mind, and once that number is reached, that's it. Or we are going to do everything in our power to reach that number as well. So again, it's really about the applicant. We're looking at the individual. All right, so I am going to keep moving on. There's still a few more things, and I know we're getting close to time here. We're very close to the end, so I'm going to table some of the rest of these questions just for now. I want to finish up with these last few slides, and then we'll get into some of those more specific questions that you do have as well. So, last one on this one, the international applicants. Okay. If you whose native language is not English, you are also required to submit proof of English proficiency. So you would need to take an English proficiency exam, sort of like the TOEFL, for example. Um, that would need to be provided to us as well. Okay. Now, transfer credits. Now, transfer credits, very simple, very easy. We do not take any more than 12 credits max. These credits need to be at least graduate level. They have to be graduate level from an accredited institution. They are usually engineering credits or math credits. They need to, of course, be courses that we have here or similar at Purdue University. You need to have earned a grade of B or higher in them, cannot be any older than 5 years, and of course, cannot have been used to complete a previous degree. So if you have all those boxes checked, not used towards a previous degree, no older than 5 years. You be or higher. We have a similar course here at Purdue University, right? These are graduate level courses, and there's not more than 12 credits. Okay. After you have been admitted to the program, you would meet with your academic advisor, let your academic advisor know that, hey, I believe I have some credits that I can transfer over that matches these courses. Your academic advisor will double check for you and will basically let you know yay or nay. Okay. If they say, oh, yes, these 9 credits will transfer over. So now you would only have to take 21 credits to complete your degree instead of the 30. Okay. But again, that happens after you've been admitted to the program, not before. So again, as much as I know you probably would like to ask, you have to wait. So, application requirements. The application requirements pretty straightforward. All applications are going to be done online. We're going to need official transcripts. We're going to need 2 written statements, your resume, 3 letters of recommendations. You're going to have to pay an application fee. It's $60 for domestic applicants, $75 for international students. Um, Keep in mind, remember your degree objective when you earn your degree from Purdue University will be a Master of Science in Aeronautics and Astronautics from Purdue University. We have 2 intakes for this program, fall and spring. So fall is going to be July 1st deadline. Spring is November 1st. I recommend that if you apply for either one of those semesters, you do it a month in advance. That is your deadline. So even though it says July 1st for fall, your deadline should be June 1st. Mainly because it takes about a month or so to get a decision. However, if something happens, we need more information or this something goes awry, you'll have that wiggle room to get that in and not, oh, shoot, the deadline's already passed. Now I have to wait. Okay. You don't want that to happen to you. So again, just think, okay, I need to make sure I have everything a month in advance. So June 1st or October 1st. Okay. So now let's break down some of these a little bit more. Transcripts. Transcripts are going to be required from every institution you've ever attended, and these need to be official transcripts. So that's what I mean by official. They have to come directly from the institution to us. These can be electronic or actually mailed to us. Now, if for whatever reason your university is like, well, we don't do that ourselves, that's fine. I'm sure they must use a third party uh, source then, like a national clearinghouse or Parchment. That's fine. We accept those as well. Just make sure that you use this email address and make sure that it's going to the graduate office. There's typically 2 options, the undergrad office and the graduate office. Make sure that you choose the graduate office. Sometimes people just like, oh, okay, they just choose the first one and without even really looking at it. And then they're like, well, I did this like a week ago. What do you mean you don't have it? More than likely, it's gone to the wrong office, and that's why we can't find it. As crazy as it may seem for people to realize, Purdue is a very big place, and not all departments talk with each other. So just make sure that you're choosing the right department. Okay. Again, keep in mind, international applicants, if you we're going to need your transcripts to be in both the original language and English language if your school was taught in another language other than English as well. Right. Resume. Your resume, of course, should be no longer than 2 pages. Make sure that you put in relevant work experience on there as it pertains to the to the AeroAstro program, obviously. Um, and then above all else, please, 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 please check for spelling and grammatical errors because that is very important. You will not believe how many times people do not do that, and we get resumes with a lot of just errors on them. So take the time to do that. Your required statements, you're going to have two statements, your academic statement and your personal history statement. Both of these statements should be between 1 to 2 pages. Make sure, again, free of spelling and grammatical errors. Your academic statement is going to talk about your why for Aero Astro program at Purdue University. Your proposed professional plans and goals that you have for yourself. Talk about your uh, your academic history up to this point. Any research or professional developments or things of that nature that you've done up to this point as well. What has prepared you for grad school? Okay. What is going to kind of make you be successful within this program? You're going to talk about all that and more in 300 to 500 words. Crazy, right? I know. Your personal history statement is going to be a little bit simpler, I like to say, but I've also been told that people find that more difficult than the academic statement, because you're going to share your life outside of academia. So, you know, your life experience, personal backgrounds, any volunteer work you may have done, things that you're working towards. Why are you going to school that's going to help prepare you outside of kind of work as well? Some people talk about why they want to give back to their community, things of that nature, So again, at the end of the day, these two written statements are going to help the reviewers get to know you more on a personal level. Okay. Letters of recommendation. So you're going to have 3 letters of recommendation that you need to do. Again, these are all going to be done in your application. So there's going to be a section there for references. You're going to select 3 names of individuals, whether that's people you work with, these industry leaders, supervisors, team leads, project leads, those managers um, that you would like to, address these 2 points. Your potential and your potential within this program as well as your work ethic. Now, if you are a recent graduate or about to graduate, then chances are you're probably going to have more academic references, which is fine as well. Maybe you still have a mentor that you're working with that's an academic reference. That's okay as well. It can be a mix. All right. So again, at the end of the day, you're really just looking for people who know you well that have no problem talking about how wonderful you are, honestly. Okay. So emissions decisions. So we do rolling emissions for our program, so you can apply now for both fall and spring semesters. So just keep that in mind. Remember, I told you we take a holistic approach to these applications, and there are 4 possible outcomes. You can ultimately, obviously, be admitted or denied. That's kind of both ends of the spectrum there. Hopefully, I know everyone's like, yeah, I just want to be admitted. That's it. Don't want to be denied because, don't, that's the bad one. But it's a chance that you may be conditionally admitted or non-degree recommendation. Well, a conditional admit is, well, there might have been something in your application that gave us a slight pause, but not enough to flat out deny you. And so we're going to conditionally admit you and say, like, hey, we're just going to have you check in with your academic advisor, maybe for the first 2 semesters. And we want you, and we're just going to check to make sure that you're doing well in your classes, that type of thing. And if you know, your first two classes you take, you earn a B or higher, you're good. Then we'll get rid of the conditional admission and you'll be fully admitted. A non-degree recommendation might be that, hey, you take these two, you're not going to be flat out, you're not going to be admitted to the program, but we think you have potential to be admitted eventually. So what we'd like for you to do is start off as a non-degree student, take some engineering classes to build, make yourself a stronger candidate. So build that resume a little bit more. So maybe take about 3 to 4 classes, so 9 to 12 credits, and then reapply to the program after that point. That way, if you are admitted at that point, then those credits will transfer over. So you're not starting over from scratch. So again, you would be able to transfer, start with either 21 or 18 credits left that you would need to take to complete the degree. Okay. So again, that's that non-degree option, right? Tuition costs. Tuition costs is going to be, again, pretty straightforward. It's $1,459 per credit. So that's times 30. You're looking at 40, no, a little over 43,000, or I guess a little less than 44,000. Okay. This price has not changed in a number of years. So something that definitely very proud of as well. Okay. All right. So just important dates to keep in mind. For the application, we have our fall application deadline, which is coming up here fairly soon. I'll actually July 1st, with classes starting late August. Remember, I told you June 1st for that. And then spring is going to be November 1st, with classes starting in mid-January. But again, I told you October 1st for that one. So, um, I know we are pretty close to time. I did have a video that I wanted to show you, but just for sake of time, since we are 3 minutes and there are a number of questions in the Q&A, I'm going to skip that for now and just get started with the questions in the Q&A. So if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in there. I'm going to just kind of keep going for that. But as far as that, I'm going to go ahead and actually skip the video. But next steps, if you want to go ahead and just apply, you're more than welcome to. Here's the application website. Here's my email address. And then if you just like to schedule an appointment with me, you can go ahead and use that QR code there to do so as well. But I'm going to go ahead and get started with some of these questions. Please feel free to go ahead and keep them coming. If you do have to take off, like I said, I know we are at time here in the next 2 minutes. Please, feel free. You go ahead. I know I don't want to keep anyone over, but if you can stay, that's great. I'm going to be here. I'll answer these questions and anything else that comes up, as I do have the time, obviously. But it was a pleasure getting to, speak with all of you. I love this lively discussion. Just keep in mind the video will be coming out probably early next week of this webinar. And if you do have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thanks again for your time as well. All right. Mm. So let's see. I work at the fair with my family, and it lasts about 6 months out of the year. Would that satisfy the 3-year work? No. It needs to, that, no, it has to be like full time year round in jobs. So, within the industry. So at the fair. And I guess what fair would that be as well? Is kind of my question, I guess. Can any credits be transferred before getting into the program in order to reduce the... Okay, talked about that one, so that's good. I answered that one. My question above got answered. Okay, but I have another one. Is there a transfer credit? Is there a credit transfer list to see if external credits are equivalent to a class master for Greer? Hmm. Uh, uh, for some programs have them. Not all of them do have like a equivalent credits list, which is why again you just really you apply, get into the program, and you just connect with your academic advisor. So that's really how we do it here as well. So you just have to wait, unfortunately. If you have been working for 5+ years and don't have recent connections with professors, will it be okay to ask supervisors, lead engineers, managers for letters of rec? Yes, I answered that one. That's good. So yes, definitely. Feasible is to do a double major. Oof. I mean, you can, or you wouldn't be able to do it at the same time. You wouldn't be able to start. You wouldn't be able to complete them both at the same time. I believe you. I mean, maybe you might be able to do them concurrently, but you wouldn't be able to start them at the same time. That would be something that you would need to talk with your academic advisor about. What I would suggest doing just to make the process go by a little bit easier, though, if you are interested in double majoring, one of the nice things about our program is that you can apply for two programs on one application. So I would apply for both aero astro engineering and mechanical engineering, and then just basically see if you get into both, because it's kind of a moot point if you don't get into both of them. But if you do happen to get into both of them, then that's when I would have that conversation with my academic advisor about double majoring and seeing if I can do the programs concurrently. Okay. Uh, is it possible to get recommendation from all in? Okay, yep. Answered that one. Although there's a non-thesis option available for online students, are there other opportunities to get involved with research? Ye yes, yes, there is opportunities like that. Um, it's not necessarily something as far as, hey, we have just opportunities within the major, like, hey, this is what you'll see, this is what you'll be doing with to earn your degree. It's things that would be outside of the norm. So that would be things you would have to do on your own. It's not going to be part of your major for of study. Okay, so you would have to do that research and networking yourself to find those types of opportunities. Okay, but that's not going to be something that was within the program um, that's already done itself. Okay, all right. Uh, would it be okay to reach out to John before I apply to see if I would go out? No. Only after. Please, please, please. Again, I know as much as you would like to, as some of you would like to reach out to John, please don't reach out to him until you've submitted your application. It's just, again, he's very busy. He wears a lot of different hats. This is one of the hats that he wears. And just to help out with his schedule, he only will look at these things after an application has been submitted. If you do it before, he's not going to do it. So just to help save yourself some time and everything, you just make sure that you do it after after your application has been submitted. Just want to clarify this point. I want to do a PhD in person. Can I be admitted to a PhD if I did an online master's with no thesis? As I mentioned before, I'm not 100% certain on that. You would need to consult with the PhD department on that. I don't see it as being an issue. However, I am not in that department. I only work with grad students within the MS programs within engineering, so I can't speak to that. I would suggest, like I said, connecting with them to double check. I know it's not an issue for our DEng program, so our Doctor of Engineering program or our Doctor of Technology programs, as those are online programs as well. But our PhD programs, I know those can be a little bit different with what they're looking for. So you would just need to reach out to them directly to see what those requirements are. Can you leverage Purdue career fairs to find a job if you are part of it? Yes, definitely. Again, as I mentioned at the top of this, first and foremost, you are a student of Purdue University. Please never forget that. If you are admitted to this program, you are a student of the university, and that includes all the amenities that go with it. And just like any other student, regardless of if you are in person or not, it's up to you to take advantage of those amenities that you are being offered. So I'm sure everyone on this call would know that given your time when you were doing your undergrad, how many things you had available to you. I'm sure you've known a ton of students that didn't take advantage of those things. They never went to the library at all. They never went to any of the labs. They never did the tutoring sessions or anything like that. And they were on campus. They had them available to them because no one's going to make you do that. It's up to you to, you know, make that choice. So same thing now as well. You have those opportunities. It's just up to you to make that choice and put yourself out there. You're going to be given an academic advisor. You're going to be given an academic coach. You're going to be given those opportunities to make those connections and ask those questions. It's just up to you to do with it what you will. Okay. I like these. All right. So, any more questions? Any more questions on this? Let's see. Answered a lot of questions today. Oh, you are welcome. Welcome. Okay. So, if not, what I'm going to do before I close, and you're more than welcome to leave, and this is going to be part of the recording as well. I do want to show this video. It's about 3 minutes, so if you want to leave, like I said, you're fine because it is going to be part of the recording. And then I'll afterwards see if there's any final questions, and if not, then I'll just call it a day from there. But I think this really does kind of sum up, you know, the Aero Astro program here at Purdue. All right. So, with that being said, let's see. Any final questions there? Nothing. Well, I appreciate you all taking the time to meet with me today. I hope you found it very informative. And like I said, I will be in touch in the next couple of days with an email that will have a link to the recording of this webinar. And if you do have any additional questions for me, please don't hesitate. Reach out to me, let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing, those applications come in. Take care, have a good rest of your day, and enjoy your weekend.